Right, welcome to the Anatomy of Our Time, a weekly show that explores and unpacks the stories, experiences, ideas, and the most confrontational issues of our time. Each week, we tackle issues around race, culture, addiction, trauma, politics, or whatever topic is in the forefront of our society. I'm your host today, Brandon Drake. I hope you find yourself, learn something new about yourself and the world we live in, the anatomy of our time. So anyway, today's guest I have on the show, it's the inaugural episode, is Randy Paul. He's running for county commissioner of Monroe County. And so I wanted to welcome him to my show. Welcome, Randy, to the show.
Thank you.
About what's going on. I know you're running for commissioner. You also launched the Green Party in Monroe County. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in your life today.
Well, I was a loyal member of the Democratic Party for over 35 years, lived in Bloomington for that long with my wife, Linda, and we've had 6 kids, and we now have grandkids, and firmly entrenched in the community. Been a volunteer advocate for most social causes. I was on the board of Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, trustee at the library. I volunteered a lot of my time. And with the Democrats, I very slowly started becoming disillusioned with what I heard, the rhetoric that I heard, and the actions I actually saw coming out of the party. And I actually really my heart left in 2012 from the Democrats. I ran for, again, commissioner during the Democratic primary as basically an advocate against the party and some of the things they were doing and some of the things they weren't doing. But then I finally left primarily over the climate crisis, the failure to enact things that I heard them talk about. For example, the city has done a great job of producing reports showing how we can locally fight climate change. The number one thing we can do is get out of our automobiles, to stop driving. And while they're saying that, they also passed legislation to spend $100 million on new parking. So on one hand, saying we really should stop driving, but on the other hand, if you're in your car, we're going to make it easy for you to park. Those inconsistencies I just couldn't live with any longer. And so I left the party to form the Green Party, which is a party that I think is more in line with my values, and frankly, I think a lot of people's values in town as far as climate change, social justice. I think if you line up the Democratic platform and the Green Party platform, most of the people that I know that are Democrats, their heart would be with the Green Party. But we started from scratch. We started last August. I started trying to build the party up, trying to find people to run for this election cycle. And for the most part, I had several candidates that were thinking about it, but in the end, it came down to whether or not they thought they could win. And I didn't go into this race thinking that I was going to win this race. This is going to be tough. I'm running as a third-party candidate. I'm running as a write-in, which means people have to go to the polling place, remember my name, remember the office I'm running for. It is a huge uphill battle for me to win. But what was important was to get out the issues and the values of the Green Party and talk about things that people don't want to talk about. And I think we've already done that. I don't know how we're going to fare on November 3rd, but I'm feeling pretty good right now. I think, if I don't win, I certainly have helped the party move forward and gotten issues out to the community that I think we need to talk about. So from that standpoint, I think we probably won already.
Okay, well, good. So tell me, because you said a lot in that answer. So we got to like break some of that down a little bit. What is it like? So for the viewers out there, I say this, like, I didn't, until a few years ago, I had no idea what a commissioner even was. And you mentioned you're running for county commissioner of Monroe County. Like, talk to us about county government and city government. What is the function of a commissioner? What is can you give us an example of what a commissioner even does? Do they just make sure roads are fixed? What do they do?
It's funny that you said that, because I was thinking back when I first heard of what a commissioner does was when I was very young. I was probably 10 or 12. I was raised on a large farm, and a lot of the area farmers they were at a cattle sale, and they were talking about the commissioner, about how all the commissioners, once they get elected, their driveways all get newly paved to their farms. Instead of dirt roads, they have paved roads, and just how corrupt that local government was. And that was in Elkhart County. And that was my first impression of commissioners, is that it was this, body that people run for and is corrupt and needs to be changed. And I think my first interest in being a commissioner was even back then. That's not to say that they're corrupt now, but it does say that I think my interest has been there because that's where a lot of the tough decision making comes from. The commissioners are the executive branch of our local government. They are
Hmm.
like the president of the federal government or the mayor of the city. The executive functions and everything that's associated with that come from the commissioners. The only weird thing is that we have three commissioners. So instead of having, if you can imagine having three mayors right now, or God forbid, we'd have three presidents. It's a structure that was put in place when we first formed as a state. I believe last time I looked at it, I think Abraham Lincoln was 12 years old when we set this structure up. It's a dinosaur, and there's a lot of things that need to be done to reform it. But they are the executive branch, so they do all the appointments, they maintain the buildings, they do contracts, everything that you would expect a mayor of a city to be doing. The county
Well,
council,
they even have a function within like social justice. I mean, if you look at the commissioners, also have they oversee the needle exchange. They have access to funding in case we have emergencies within our county. Like we have one like the pandemic right now. They have access to funding that they could usually actually use for that instead of just keeping hidden in a nest egg somewhere that they've held on to for years. So there's a lot of social justice element and economic elements to this too that affect poverty. Right? Am I right?
exactly. And so
Okay.
during this pandemic, the commissioners had a large part to do with the rules we're currently under: wearing masks, social distancing, the funding for small business that they did earlier in the year. So there's a tremendous amount of responsibility that goes with it. It makes it more difficult the way it's structured. Normally, an executive branch doesn't have three different people in it, and that can cause some problems. The
So what did
parallel
you
the
go
parallel
ahead?
branch is the county council, and that's like the Congress, that's like the city council, and they essentially just they control the money. And so you can
Yeah.
have ongoing debate, which is more powerful, the branch that controls the money or the branch that presents the ideas. But that's really the separation between the two.
Okay. But so during this pandemic, have you seen the commissioners utilize that role effectively and really make an impact on what's happening with the pandemic as far as uh, have you seen any movement on their end that shows that they've done anything of note?
I will credit them with having enough common sense to follow the health department.
Mm-hmm.
So they pretty much have, and I think the health department has done a really good job of protecting us. They've gone against the governor in what he was doing. They really made some tough calls, and I credit them not getting in the way of those decisions. I'm critical of them, quite frankly, because I think they've lost touch with. I think they understand the pandemic. I think they've lost touch with the citizens in our community. The best example I can give you is that during this pandemic, while they were giving out grants to keep businesses afloat, they were asking the county council for a 70% pay increase for themselves.
Hmm.
And if you think about that for a minute, 70% pay increase for anybody, anytime, anywhere, private business or in government is obnoxious. No, I've never ever heard of anyone doing that. It's
Yeah.
particularly obscene when so many people are hurting that they actually felt, one, that they deserved it, and two, they could get by with it, which they did part of it. And it goes back to one of the reasons I ran is that this community has been dominated by one party rule for decades. The Democrats, and I was a member of them for a long time, and I helped elect some of them that are in office now. When you have that much power and that much control, you can pretty much do what you want. And they've shown that they can do that, including going to having a Democratic commissioner's office go to the Democratic council and ask for a personal pay raise. If there's no other reason to say we need another party in power, not that me being elected as one person's power, but at least having a representative from another party to hold them accountable. If I'd been a commissioner at that time, the vote was 3-0 to ask for that kind of increase. It would have been a 2-1 vote. I would have voted against it. But as a commissioner, I would have had a microphone and a platform to argue against it. Currently, all I have is go to meetings, speak during 3-minute public comment period to object about things. If I actually had a microphone and a vote, I think I could really do something as far as change. And more than anything else, attitude about the commissioners currently. I would never ask that from our community, to give myself that big a pay raise during this crisis. And in fact, I've said before, and this isn't political for me, I objected to this so much. If I was elected, I won't take the pay raise. I don't know how to do that. I mean, I've talked to an attorney. He said, I can't turn down the pay raise if they enact it, but I can donate it. There is no way that I'm going to take a 70% pay increase if I get elected. If for no other reason, I don't want to be any part of this. I don't want somebody a year or 2 years from now say, aren't you one of the guys that just gave yourselves that huge pay increase? I want to honestly say no, and I didn't take it.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because you said that you like did you object during public comment about that pay raise? Did you?
Yes.
Was you there when it happened?
Now, the nice thing about the meetings is that you can attend all the meetings by Zoom. I posted it on my Facebook page. I've been incredibly outspoken on it.
Okay.
I just can't yet find a justification for it.
So let me ask you this though. Tell me why you don't see the justification for it. What is the issue with it? Is it because we're in a pandemic and that funds could be allocated to other means and other resources that we could help the community with, or what is your objection about it?
Well, there are several. One is I, like so many people in this community, have spent my life in Bloomington being a volunteer. In fact, most of the time, my kids, for example, when I was with the ACLU, most of my kids even thought I worked at the ACLU. I put so many hours in. I put in more than full-time hours on most of the volunteer work that I do, and never expected, nor would I want, any compensation. And it's not just me. I don't think this community could survive without the volunteers we have working. That's one thing. Mm-hmm. I would do the job as county commissioner as a volunteer, quite frankly. I think it's an honor to be a public servant, to be elected, to be given that kind of responsibility. I think is a true honor, and I don't need to be paid to do it. But secondly, it is considered a part-time job, and they're making right now, without the pay raise, about $38,000 a year. That is more than some people, or a lot of people in this community, make full-time. So a part-time salary of $38,000 a year, if that's not good enough, then you shouldn't run for office. And two of the people running for re-election who are supporting this pay raise, they chose to run for re-election. If they can't support themselves on this salary, if they don't like this salary, if the job is too hard for them, then don't run again. That's part of the job. But the last point is, I can, in good faith and good conscience, say that while people are losing jobs, when people are losing their homes and their health care, and they can't take care of their kids, and utilities are being shut off, there is no way that as a public official I would stand there and say, give me a higher pay because I can't make it on what we're currently being paid. When the time comes that we have to start worrying about whether or not our public officials are making enough money, it's a time we need to rethink our priorities. This is thinking that's backwards, and I think they need to be called on it. But right now, without someone else in there, it's just Democrats being counted on to call themselves on this stuff, and clearly they're not doing it.
Yeah. So what is so I mean, those are all good points, and that's what I was thinking when you said it, is like, why during a time are we asking for pay raises when there's a lot of hurting people? But here's my thing, right? Like, why can't some of that money be allocated to other community at need, like different community organizations that need it? We can go up on the west side of the community, up on Reverend E.D. Butler's apartment complex up there, and help put in programming for kids, for school. I mean, a lot of things a lot of that money can be allocated in other places than people's pockets. So I don't know.
You're right. And it can be, and it should be. And the problem with pay raises that people, I don't think about enough, is when you increase their salary by that amount, that means every future year, any cost of living increases, any future pay raises are compounded on top of that higher base. This ends up being an enormous amount of money. If you project it out 10, 15, 20 years from now, this is not just a one-shot deal. This is not a bonus they're getting. This is going to be part of their salary structure from this point on for every commissioner on. I also don't like the idea that a commissioner can vote for their own increase while they're serving. In Congress, if I remember correctly, if they vote themselves a pay raise, it doesn't go into effect until the next term, the next 2-year term. So there's something inherently wrong, I think, with someone benefiting so much that they can increase their pay while they're still serving. So if this 70% had passed, they would have received that in 2021. What happened was it went to the county council. So the all Democrat commissioners went to the all Democrat, except for there's one Republican, asked for that pay raise. The council, if you watch that meeting, they looked embarrassed, and they should be. And so what they finally ended up doing is to kind of save face, is they refer to it as, let's make a down payment. Let's give the commissioners a 25% increase, with the idea that they would come back next year or the year after to fill in the difference. So there was a promise to pay the 70. There was an actual 25% increase. Talk to anybody on the street right now. Many people aren't getting pay increases at all if they've kept their job. If they do, they're getting 1.5%, 2% pay raises. What makes the county commissioners so special? I don't quite get.
Well, I think it shows you how out of touch. We always talk about how out of touch national media, national politicians are with the people, but it's also spilling over into the local. I always say this to you on off record, is that, Bloomington is just a microcosm of like what's happening on a larger scale, on the macro. And it's like, so to me, that move that the commissioner made to ask for that increase, for the commissioners made to ask for that increase, was just a reflection of what we see happening nationally. And that's why I think that, in my opinion, we need an overhaul of government locally and nationally in order for the people to really take back. I remember sometime like a couple years ago, I was sitting with one of the mayor's colleagues, and I said to him, I said, the mayor forgets who his boss is. We're his bosses, the voters. And that's what I see with a lot of politicians. And that's the problem I see, is that politicians forget that the people who elected them, the people who are hurting, the people who lost their jobs, are being denied unemployment, can't get a stimulus check because the national government can't get along and can't do anything bipartisan anymore. While those people are suffering, you're lollygagging around asking for raises. You see what I'm saying? Get my frustration?
I agree. What we're asking is, if I'm elected, and that's a big if, because the two-party system is set up to make it as difficult for third parties like myself to get in and get elected. But if I were elected, it would make history. It'd be the first time a third-party candidate had won in Monroe County or in Indiana. Mm-hmm. But more importantly than that, it would give one person in the commissioner's office, the Green Party and myself, a role to hold the Democrats accountable. And we just don't have that now. And I asked people to think about this for a minute. What have you got to lose? I mean, I'm one vote out of 3. If I did something totally crazy, if I'm just out of control, I can be outvoted. I've already pledged to only serve 4 years, 1 term, so you don't even have to elect me out of office. But take a look at our platform and the agenda for the Green Party and what I'm proposing. And particularly pay attention to what I'm talking about for people who oftentimes aren't represented, and that's the people living in poverty. Take a look at that and ask yourself, what do we got to lose? Let's elect at least one person who might be able to hold this Democratic Party accountable.
Yeah, so but if I'm on the outside looking in, Randy, why you? What are you going to do to make anything any different for people? Tell me what you plan to do if you were elected day one, to walk in that building, or to you know what I mean? Like, go into that building and say, like, what are you really going to try to get the other commissioners in the count? Because you're up against the council, and you're up against 2 other Democratic commissioners. How are you going to go in there and influence any change? And what change would that be? What tangible things can you tell me you'd do?
Well, I can spend a long time on that. Let me try to shorten it just briefly. One, I've posted the policies I would support. The Green New Deal is a big part, and I want to be able to talk about that at some point, because it's more than just an environmental policy. It's also social and economic. But I think that if people are on the fence as to whether or not to take a chance with me, I think the reason it's important for me to win this campaign are the values and the life experiences that come with it. I think people need someone like me in the commissioner's office. Someone who I've made a 6-figure income because of my health and disability. We came crashing down to where I could no longer work. I was a sole income source for our family, and we went from a 6-figure income to absolutely nothing. We lost everything. We lost home, cars, just everything because of healthcare. And this was before the Affordable Care Act. And I was in a situation, probably the most painful example of how bad things were for us is my 3-year-old daughter, Jackie, was very sick, was running 102 temperature. I rush her to the doctor's office. We wait for about an hour, and the receptionist says, "Mr. Paul, we can't see her because you have a past due account of $30. So my daughter is just burning up in my arms, and they're telling me she can't get any help because of $30. And so I did what most parents had to do that before the Affordable Care Act. I rushed her to the hospital. The hospital took great care of her, and they charged me $500. And that's where a point where someone living in poverty, you can't get ahead, because the only way I could have taken care of her is by going to the hospital, and they did what they needed to do, but then you just get whammed with another $500 bill. People need someone like me in the commissioner's office because I've been there, done that, and came out on the other side. And Linda and I survived that because we had really good friends who had the means to step up and say, this family is going to get destroyed if we don't help them. I mean, Linda and I, we were about 3 weeks from being on the street with 6 small children. And for those who don't know, there's no shelter in town for a family of 8, especially when 6 of the 8 are under the age of 12. Linda and I had the discussion of who was going to take the kids. How are we going to divide the kids up? Because few families can take on 6 at one time. Between friends and family and relatives, we had that discussion. And I'm telling you, unless you've had that discussion, you don't know how painful it is to divide your family up because you have no means of help. I've done that. And I want to be in the commissioner's office when someone comes up and says, this is what we're dealing with. You know, oftentimes government says you need a partner in government. You don't need a partner. You need a friend in government. And you need someone like me who's been through it, understands it, and above all, knows how to try to get through it.
So I'm hearing you say a voice for people that are hurting in similar situations than that.
Well, I will give I don't want to be overly critical. This government has limits as far as what they can do. But there was early in the spring a lot of work done on trying to bail out, particularly the tourist industry, because of how hard they got hit. The city decided to loan businesses money, which I disagreed with. To me, it made no sense if a business, and I was in business for 20 years on my own, if a business is in trouble, at the end of the period, I didn't see how giving them a loan they had to repay back really helped them. The county did a better job. They gave the money out in grants. The difference would, if I'd been on the commissioner's office when that discussion was taking place, there was no discussion about the individuals. They talked to businesses saying, are you going to keep employees on? But there was no requirement to. And my perspective and my work from the point I would be elected would be, every time someone says, let's help the business, I'll say, fine, I was a business person too, but what about the individual? And frankly, there's been very little help given to the individuals during this pandemic. Was a release of money to the trustees of $100,000 to help what's coming up and what people aren't talking about. But I believe it's the first few days in November, either the first, second, or third, is when the moratorium on shutting off utilities and evicting people from their homes ends. And we are going to see just this huge rush of victims of being removed from their homes. Homelessness is going to go up. Utilities are going to be shut off just going into the winter. We've got a huge crisis ahead, and I don't hear people talking about it. I will be a real advocate for the individual, and I'm going to be a real advocate for people who live in poverty and who don't have access to government. I don't have to be an advocate for people of means. They've already got people doing that for them. But what is needed are people who are really hurting, who don't feel like they're represented. They don't know who they can go to. And certainly they don't have anybody, I don't think, that has the experience I've had, both in good times and bad. And that gives you a perspective, I think, that's valuable in government.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like, because the reason I asked that question is because to me, it still baffles me that when I search Google and I look at media elsewhere, I see cities and some counties throughout the United States that have actually taken money that was allocated for something else and moved it in order to give it to people, just like the business loans and all that stuff. They check credit on that. Like some businesses, like restaurants, for example, they don't always have good credit that first couple of years.
Right.
Like, so a lot of people got left out of that. And this, like, and a lot of people who may not have good credit, but took a risk and dumped all their whole life savings into a business. They got left out of that. They didn't think about they scathe the top of the bottom, but they forget about the middle, the bottom, and the very bottom. They always forget about that.
Well, when I talk about background,
changing.
I was raised on a large dairy farm in northern Indiana. And so I'm worried about and concerned about what's been going on with farmers for a long time, which I think, I've got some ideas for. I own my own business, financial services business, so I know what it takes to make a business operate.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got sick, that's when I retired from it. But I certainly understand the problems that a business owner has. And now, have been disabled for now 20 years. I understand what it's like for healthcare and not to have it, for one. And even now, after the Affordable Care Act, it's still, with premiums and deductibles and copays, is still incredibly expensive. And many people aren't getting healthcare because they can't afford it. So I think I bring a wealth of experience, but also I think the life experiences I've had will make me a much better commissioner.
Cool. All right. So it was nice to do an interview with you. I think we're going to do a few more throughout the coming weeks up to the election. So that'll be good. And is there anything else you want to tell us before we'll address the other issues on the next interview. We'll especially address having an all-female commission, things like that, like some of the race issues, that social justice issues that haven't been tackled yet. We'll get on that on the next episode. But today I just want to give a little idea of what county government function and why you were running.
And one of the things I forgot to mention that I do is your point of other resources going during this pandemic to help people. And there's some things that I think we need to, it's an overused phrase of thinking outside the box. But for example, one of the racial issues that I think has been dividing this community for a long time could be part of that solution. Selling Bearcat and using those funds to reach out to the community for social issues to have. I would prefer to have it, if it was so, to have the proceeds go to an independent commission, citizen driven, to see where those go to. But those would be dollars that we currently aren't using. And we could turn that not only in terms of a benefit for people who are hurting, but that's such a divisive issue as far as race and social justice is something to me that we need to deal with and just sell Bearcat. We need to close down farmers market, and we need to put a countywide co-op together, not only to get away what the horrible race issues we've run into, but also to help farmers have a different market and a better market for their produce. There's a lot of things that we can do, but it's not going to happen unless you got a commissioner who's sitting there saying, what can we do for individuals who are hurting, instead of talking about what's good for business. And I'll say this, and it's going to be somewhat controversial, but the Republican Party pretty much left town. The reason the Green Party is the only one running, for the most part, is Republicans kind of gave up. The Republicans traditionally have pulled the big dollar, the big donors, the big money in any community. Where do you think the big dollars went when the Republicans left? It went to the Democratic Party. So some of the problems we're saying and we're seeing where we were so critical of the Republicans, it landed on our front porch as Democrats. And I think what you're seeing now is a lot of the abuses you saw and you didn't like in the Republican Party, the Democrats weren't turning that money down, and they're the ones benefiting from it now. We need more than just the Democratic Party running things. And hopefully we can show the Green Party can do that job too.
Yeah, I mean, you went into the Bearcat and into the farmers market thing, but really there might be some people watching that don't even know what either of those things are. So what is a Bearcat? What happened with the Bearcat? Why did you bring that up?
Well, it falls in the category of it's happened all over the country, and particularly now with all the police brutality. It's an assault vehicle. It's like militarizing the police, and it is a vehicle that is used in high risk kind of problems that the police would run into. Typically, the police would justify it by, hostage situations, dangerous police kind of work that you have to do. and I understand that, and I'm not here to be anti-police. I am interested as to why we could get along without it before, and nothing horrible seemed to have happened. And now all of a sudden we have to have this very elaborate, and it does look like a military assault kind of vehicle. Why we need it in Bloomington? And it just brings up all the bad things when you try to militarize a police force. And I'm not saying that that was their intent, but I think they overshot the mark in thinking what they need. When I asked what was done before in these hostage kind of situations, which we don't have very often, they said they would go outside, state police, backup, which I don't see why, since that seemed to work in the past, why that wouldn't work now. It's divisive in this community because it just sends the wrong signal, I think. And I think it's something that we could easily solve by saying, it was a mistake when we did it. We can resolve this. And I think it would go so far in bringing people together and start talking about race and start listening to each other when you've got these other issues out there that just throw gas on the fire. Farmers market is a very hurtful.
Let's stay on the Bearcat for a second. I want to stay on that because when you made a couple comments, you said that what their intent was. Well, they knew what they were doing because we were before George Floyd happened. People in this community were in an uproar if they were going to go purchase that vehicle, and they knew damn well and good way before that purchase actually ever happened why it was an issue with especially the Black community and other communities within Bloomington, but mainly the Black community, why they had an issue with it. So they knew damn well and good and had a chance to turn back before they made that purchase. So therefore, I believe that intent was there, and they know damn good and well that it's to militarize the police and to put themselves in a positions of power over especially communities of color, especially the Black community, but also poor communities. And it's a toy to them, essentially. And that's why they weren't willing to turn back at that time.
And I was going to say,
so that's
I mean,
I believe that now the way we can make an amends is to sell that vehicle as an offering, so to speak, to the Black community to say, you know what, you were right. We didn't listen, but here you go. We're going to sell this now, and we're going to take this money and allocate it to other needs, maybe social workers or other things we might need in the police department.
Right, and I think ever since there was the attempted lynching over the 4th of July.
Which I want to point something out. How many social workers have they needed, but they haven't had on hand because they don't have them on staff, versus how many times they've needed the Bearcat? They've probably, I venture to say that they've needed social workers hundreds of more times than they've ever needed that Bearcat.
Yeah, I mean, don't quote me on this, but I think it's close. I think from the time this controversy started, I think they've used it 3 times, and that was to deliver a warrant that they thought was particularly dangerous.
Yeah, but
it has not been
I
used.
venture to wonder who that warrant was served on and what color they were and what socioeconomic background they came from.
But particularly if you focus on since the attempted lynching over the 4th of July, when race became just boiled over in town, where you had protests on the street, you actually had a woman run people down. I mean, it was a side of Bloomington that I always knew was there, but we saw it and we were listening to it. And there were, from our government, including our commissioners, a lot of rhetoric about we need to listen, which I thought initially was a great idea. It's like what I've seen before. The rhetoric just doesn't match the action. And I just haven't seen much of that. I haven't seen a lot of listening. I haven't seen a lot of understanding.
Well, listening, and then the next thing that comes after listening is action, and that's what you're saying is lacking.
And I think both sides walked away from the city budget recently in the last week, and nobody got what they were hoping for. Nobody got what they wanted. And I think it just shows that we are so far apart when it comes to race. And there are little things. I mean, it's kind of like brick by brick, you try to build a solution. And one of the first bricks I would lay down is something that is so divisive in this community. There are 2 issues that are just get in the way of any really honest discussion. One is Bearcat. I don't see how we can keep that and not sell it and in good faith negotiate any kind of partial solution to try to ease the tension of race in this community and to make things more equitable. I don't see how you can do that without acting on Bearcat. And the other one is Farmers Market, where you have a white supremacist group in that market. And how can you go in and talk about race when the city is supporting a market that I don't think they should be involved in. I think we need to get the city out of the market business. And people will criticize me saying, Randy, you're a commissioner, you're county, that's the city. I'm tired of that. We are so bad at leadership that we actually draw lines and titles and say, well, if you're a county commissioner, you can't say anything about the city. That is nonsense. The commissioner's office, the city offices, they need to work in conjunction with each other, cooperate with each other, and they need to put pressure on each other. And I would be more than happy to put as much pressure as I can on the city to close down the farmers market. It does not serve this community. And it's this other brick I'm talking about. If you close that down, you're going to go a long way to getting people to trust you when you start talking about race.
Well, I got to add something in there, though, because I know from experience of being friends with people in government that I've heard about negotiations, specifically a particular negotiation that went on between city and county for the next attached to the Marriott. What do they call that? The convention center.
Yeah, right.
And they were negotiating over that, and the county at the time that I was friends with people in the county, they were using negotiating pieces to get what they wanted out of that deal. Like, we'll do X, Y, and Z, and we want X, Y, and Z. So as a county commissioner, you do have leverage within other negotiations to tie in. This is what I'd like to see happen with the Bearcat. If I'm going to give you this, Mr. Mayor, then this is what I want in return. You see what I'm saying?
And what people don't understand is that the county commissioners and council, the city of Bloomington is part of the county. So I do have a right to voice an opinion, and certainly have a right to use my microphone and my platform to be able to express an opinion. We haven't talked about it yet, but another thing I feel strongly about is it's been talked about a lot as far as training, sensitivity training for county employees. There's been talk about at the city council for every piece of legislation to be viewed through a lens of racism. Is any new legislation that they're passing in any way racist in a possible outcome? Things that aren't being talked about that comes from the contract with Black America is to start mandating education at the elementary school level for civil rights and anti-racism with young school children. I taught in the schools, and I know what impact you can have on a child at that young an age. We need to start talking about this problem when kids are in school and the elementary level. But I have not heard a word of that from the county commissioners. Instead, they just approved a contract to spend $300,000 to train half of the employees that they had originally targeted for sensitivity training, racism. The Black Lives Matter proposal, if I remember correctly, was somewhere around $40,000. And you'd have people who would actually be teaching those classes that actually have life experiences to go with it. Mm-hmm. This county government doesn't act like they understand that we are in a pandemic. They make decisions about it. They do the health part of it, but they're spending money like there's no tomorrow. And I don't think they get it. The money's not there. So there are a lot of ideas that I think the Green Party has proposed and that I support that could really help people a lot. And we can talk about some of it later, but there's ideas I've got for farmers who I feel particularly close to since I was raised in a farm.
Yeah, we can talk about a lot of that later, but I want to go back to that. That makes me flash back to when you said they asked for a 70% increase, and this is just allegation, but it's like maybe they see down the road that the money's not going to be there. Maybe they do know the truth, and that's why up here they're asking for that raise because they know if they come back in 2 years and ask for the raise that the money might actually not be there. So that may be too far for you to say, but I'm going to say it for you. Another thing is like, so we'll touch on a lot of those other issues. We got time in the future, but the thing is today, like, people need to know who you are. Like, what are you about? Why are you even running? Like, why are you? And I think we touched on a little bit of that, but the next episode, I at least want to get into a little bit more about your story and then move into some of these other issues that you want to tackle.
Okay. Let me close with this.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, where I'm a write-in candidate for county commissioner, and that's especially hard to win because two things have to happen. One, you have to remember my name. I'm not going to appear on the ballot. So when you get to the county commissioner District 2, the only thing that's going to identify my race is I'm running against Julie Thomas. Under her name, you'll see a box that says write-in. You have to put an X or shade in the box, and technically you need to keep your lines within the box, and then you write my name next to it. It takes
So you're a writing candidate, yeah.
takes real effort to vote for a write-in candidate. So those
Yeah.
who are supporting what we're trying to do, just be aware, this isn't as easy as just checking off a box. You have to be really committed to vote for third parties this way. But I hope that with enough exposure, people will remember me and particularly remember the right office.
So why do you got to write you in? Why aren't you on the ballot?
You know, there's a lot of obstacles that the two parties put in front of third parties so they can't run. And to run as a third party, you can't just, like, if you're a Democrat, you can't just sign a paper saying I'm running. You have to have so many signatures on a petition. In my case, we needed 1,100 signatures, which I've done before for other candidates. That wasn't the concern. The concern came because the timing was during the pandemic. And the group that I was working with, we just felt that it was irresponsible to go out to the public, violate social distancing by going up with a petition to have people sign, exchanging pens and pencils and paper. We were jeopardizing the health of our supporters and the voters. So we couldn't sign the petitions. And I went to the election board, the Indiana State Election Board, which is made up of 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And I urged them to let us, because of the pandemic, to do those signatures online. With the precedence of you can register to vote online, you can ask for your absentee ballot to vote online, but they refuse to let third-party candidates get their petitions signed online.
It's another way for them to keep their monopoly.
So you keep the third parties out. And so the only other decision was either not run or do this write-in campaign. Now, the Green Party is filing a lawsuit against Indiana for this, but that's not going to help us until the mid-years, 2 years from now. I would like my election to show that, one, there is an increased interest in third parties, that people will vote for a third-party candidate, even under the most extreme hardship. They actually do what they need to do to cast a vote for me. And to show that this is something that we really need to change the laws so that we can have elections. We ought to be able to have a third party be able to compete on a one-on-one basis. I think the results could be very different if I was facing my opponent one-on-one, if my name was next to hers on the ballot. Instead, we make it so hard for someone to vote for me. I'm at a huge disadvantage. But if you support us in the Green Party, just understand it's not going to be as easy as you're normally used to. You have to make some effort here.
Okay. Yeah, and make sure that so make sure that when you're voting, when you get to District 2, that you, underneath Julie's name, there's a write-in box. That's where you write in Randy's name, Green Party candidate, and it's got to be commission or not council. Commission or not council. Right. But thank you for joining me, Randy. I appreciate you. And thank you for being my first episode. Take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care. I love you.
All right. Thanks, Brandon.